Hey guys, welcome to the show. I'm just contemplating all of the products that we've released, especially lately. We've got some really great PaaS stuff that we're going to talk about today. And everybody knows that once Microsoft releases a product, we never abandon it. I'm just sitting here playing my Zune guitar. Hey guys, and welcome to the show. That Zune thing was just really a joke. Nobody has Zunes anymore, except me. I think I've got like a drawer full of them.
Well, the Guardians of the Galaxy,
Yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, hey, Guardians of the Galaxy brought it back.
Yeah.
In case you guys haven't realized it yet, I have with me again special guest Ryan Berry. Ryan, say hi, buddy.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Glad to be back. How's it going, Lex?
It's going great. When I look up, so I've got the camera right here, but you're on a monitor that's actually above me. And when I look up and see that Chippendale picture in the RB above the doorway, I just know I'm home.
Yeah, definitely. I am a bona fide Chippendale fan.
Yeah. I love it. My daughter, when she was younger, well, let's face it, I love Disney. I go to Disney all the friggin' time. But when my daughter was young, and she figured out how to tell the difference between Chip and Dale, it became kind of a game. It's like, oh, which one is that? And then she'd be, oh, Dad, that's Chip. Look at the nose, So it's just awesome. I love Disney. I'm such a huge Disney guy.
Yeah, I don't even want to think about the amount of money that I've provided them over the year. But I'm a stockholder there as well, so I'm benefiting from it.
There you go. Yeah, talk about a great. People don't realize what a great technology company Disney is because they don't actually produce, a gadget.
Right.
But and the technology that goes into some of those animatronics and those rides and stuff. I'm telling you, when AI takes over and we need a robot manufacturer, Disney's going to get the call, and we all better look out because there's going to be a giant enabling after us.
Yep. I just saw on the news that what was her name? Sophia just was granted citizenship in Saudi Arabia. That AI robot that's been in the news.
Yeah, that's funny.
Anyway.
All right, so listen, guys out there listening to this, if both of you, this is going to be thank you so much. This is going to be a very relaxed show. We're going to talk about a lot of new innovation, and actually we're going to talk about the top new innovations in PaaS. So this should be really interesting, and I'm just going to get out of the way and let Ryan kind of do his thing. So Ryan, it's all you, buddy.
All right, let me share my desktop here. So Lex, one thing that comes up often when I'm talking with customers is, Azure costs money. Anytime my employees or if I'm a customer, that is, anytime my employees are doing things in Azure, it's costing me money, and I want to be able to instill some level of control over where they deploy stuff to, maybe what countries. If I'm a bank, I want to make sure maybe they don't deploy stuff over in Asia to prevent any customer data from accidentally leaking over into regions where it's not allowed. Or maybe if I'm an IT administrator, I want to instill some level of policies to make sure that when somebody spins up a virtual machine, that they have BitLocker encryption enabled, or that they perform some number of steps that are non-default characteristics of building out that infrastructure that I want to enforce to protect my assets, and make sure that everything's consistent, while still giving my employees flexibility to do things in Azure, really quickly and easily. So, and I don't know if that's something that you've heard come up at all in Azure, and kind of putting some level. Yeah. So we've introduced, and actually this has been around for a bit of time, but it was difficult to, I shouldn't say difficult. You had to do it through scripting, and it's called Azure Resource Manager policies. And we have them now in the portal, and you see I'm looking at a resource group, which again, as a reminder, a resource group is just a container that you can put stuff into. I could give you permission to this resource group, and if you logged in, you wouldn't be able to see all of the other resource groups that I have in my subscription. So it's a way to kind of create some level of containment around security assignment, as well as having a way to be able to contain costs. So like if I had a web application, I could put them all into a resource group and be able to see, the network bandwidth, the VMs, web servers, all of that stuff. I'd be able to see all of the costs associated with those related elements combined together. So there's a number of different practical uses for resource groups. But so you can actually assign policies at a resource group level or at a subscription level. So you can make it universal across all resource groups in an Azure subscription. So when I go into policies, we'll be able to see some of the options that we have available to create. And I don't have any assigned to this particular resource group, so I'm just going to hit add. And it's actually pretty straightforward to add one of these. They just kind of have English descriptions about what that particular policy is doing. So as an example, audit missing blob encryption for storage accounts. So if I enabled this particular policy, what that would do is if I turn this resource group over to you and you create a storage account that has encryption at rest turned off, that would be a violation of the policy, and actually it would inhibit you from being able to do that just because this policy is enabled.
Yeah, this is really cool. So it's giving us policy level control like we currently have over servers and user accounts and OUs, et cetera, inside the OS. Exactly. It's giving us that type of control over our Azure environments. And this is when I apply a policy like this, is it applied to all resources in a resource group? So in other words, if I create another virtual machine, these policies apply to that machine because Correct. It's in the resource group.
You got it.
So the resource group kind of becomes the OU.
Yep.
That's cool.
Yep. So there's a couple different ways that you can apply it. Like I said, you can also do it at a subscription level where it will bubble down to all resource groups. So even new resource groups that maybe didn't exist at the time the policy was created.
Yeah. Yep. So that would be kind of the equivalent of the domain level policy or the forest level policy.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, that's cool. I like it.
So these are some, this particular policy has actually been in place for quite some time, but you could only enable it through PowerShell. So now you can easily do it in the portal. And what I'm doing here is I can actually go in here and say, I only want deployments in this particular region to go to, central U.S., west central U.S. So you can actually restrict what country or region that users are allowed to deploy to. I can also go in here. This actually, from a cost containment standpoint, it's allowed. Let me let this thing load here. So one of the options is allowed virtual machine SKUs. This allows you to actually toggle, for instance, prohibiting you from creating G-series machines, actually. And for those of you who don't know, the G-series moniker for virtual machines, we actually referred, our internal code name for that was Godzilla. So those are gigantic machines that they're also expensive. I mean, they have a purpose. If you have a workload that needs some significant horsepower, that's what they're there for. But if I'm giving this subscription to you, as an example, and I want to make sure that you're not spinning these things up and doing Bitcoin mining at my expense as a business owner, I can actually enable those some policies to make you not be able to create some of those more costly SKUs.
Yeah. So it's like what, $17,000 a minute?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't quote me on that, guys. I have no idea how much a Godzilla machine costs.
Yeah, and there's actually, a funny story. I have a peer of mine that actually tried to use some of the N series machines, which have GPUs in them, to do Bitcoin mining, and it was a net negative that he ended up getting out of that. So unfortunately, the pricing isn't such that you can make a profit by doing Bitcoin mining and paying for the Azure resource, unfortunately. So
yeah, but kudos for trying.
Yeah, exactly. I gotta give him a thumbs up for that. So All right. So moving on to some other features.
Maybe that'll be my retirement job, Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, there you go.
I can see it now with a little pickaxe and a, little helmet with a light on it.
Yeah, that's probably a different kind of mining.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
So one thing that you said earlier that I want to follow up on just a little bit is that a lot of these features were available via PowerShell and not in the GUI. And
Correct.
It seems like that's kind of the way that we do things, is that we make new features available a lot earlier via PowerShell, and then eventually they get moved into the UI. Is that kind of a planned path that we take?
Yep, you got it. In fact, actually, one of the things I'm going to be showcasing today is unfortunately only available through the command line interface or through PowerShell.
Yeah.
Again, carrying on that tradition you just highlighted. But so that's actually by design. So what happens is whenever you do anything through PowerShell or the command line interface, or even through the REST API, the REST layers, because under the covers, really, when you're using the PowerShell or command line interface, they're actually hitting the REST endpoints. So really that's where it all starts, is the REST interfaces, the web services that we allow for customers to use to perform administrative tasks under subscription. So things start there. And the technical reason why is that in preview, especially if it's early preview, there might be some changes or maybe the nomenclature of how things are named might vary or be altered before it gets into later stages in preview. So the team that actually builds all of the user interfaces, we call them the blades, these little flyouts that you see kind of pop up every time I click on something. They actually also are tapping into those same APIs. So they wait for some of that plumbing to solidify. Plus, that we want to get features out as quickly as we can, especially ones that customers have been waiting for. So there's always going to be a lag before some of the user interface stuff gets made. But that's under the covers, the user interface really is just hitting the same services that you and I would hit using PowerShell or the command line.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome.
So another thing that's come up with customers that I've dealt with, particularly ones in finance or doing stuff with government entities, when you deploy let's just use VMs, talking about them specifically, because there's a lot of other stuff other than VMs, even though those are kind of the easy thing to talk about in Azure. But when let's say that a customer wants to deploy virtual machines in Azure, and those virtual machines are reliant on features of Azure that have public endpoints, specifically storage accounts. Or if I wanted to have maybe a web server that talk to one of the PaaS, or actually more the SaaS offerings, or the software as a service, SQL Azure database, where a customer doesn't have to worry about administrating the SQL environment. They can just connect up to the database directly. Again, SQL Azure DB has public endpoints, or public IP addresses. And if I'm a company in the finance sector, that might be a little bit concerning to me, that even though I can lock down that that particular environment and restrict what IP addresses are allowed to connect to that to that SQL server, it still has a public IP address. I don't want to create an attack vector, a potential attack vector, where somebody, some average Joe can try to do something nefarious.
Yeah.
So that's been a request for quite some time, is to if I wanted to create an intranet application, internal application that's not publicly accessible, and I want to be able to have better control over, or our customers want to have better control over who can access that. So we have something called service endpoints, and this is actually something that you can add at a network level. So in here, I can actually go in here and say this particular virtual network has a singular subnet in it called web subnet. And I can actually go in here, and right now there's only a couple of options, just SQL and storage are the first two services to get onboarded to this. But the plan is to add other services to have public endpoints. And what this does is it allows my network and my network only to be able to communicate with these public services. So even though there's a public IP, we deny all traffic hitting that public IP, and we're only allowing it to come from the particular subnets that are enrolled into that. So it's a way to not only restrict access publicly, but also restrict access within a customer subscription. So maybe there's a production network that has, using storage as an example, maybe there's a table storage that has, account numbers for customers in it. And I don't want my developers to be able to have access to that, even though they might have a QA environment deployed in the same subscription. Well, I can actually go in here and administratively say that I only want the storage accounts to be accessed from this particular subnet. So you have some ability to kind of restrict what what accounts that the customers can actually access. So if I go into like a storage account here, I can actually go in reverse. So I was looking at the network side, and now I can actually go into a storage account. So I'm looking at this the storage account here, and I can actually go in. So like I said earlier, I was looking at the network level where I can actually apply rules to allow it to communicate with specific services in Azure. And now looking at a storage account here specifically, I can actually tag a storage account to only allow traffic from a particular a virtual network, or a subnet within that virtual network. So I can hit add virtual network, or I can make a new one here. We've always had the ability with SQL to apply IP range filtering, and in fact actually SQL denies traffic by default. You actually have to allow or enable particular IP addresses to connect to that public endpoint. So now we allow that with storage as well, to be able to define specific external IP addresses external to Azure that are allowed or entrusted to be able to communicate with the storage account. So this is, and I'm looking at a storage account, but this applies to SQL as well. So those are the first two services we have that for.
Wow, that's cool.
All right, so moving on. So
Azure.
this...
Did they just say Azure Portal says?
It might have.
Yeah, it did. It said the Azure Portal says.
Yeah, I think I hit. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Because I had gone into creating a new rule, and I abandoned it. So.
That's funny.
Yeah. So this is actually a feature that is really hot off the presses, and my subscription is not enabled for preview. So I can't demonstrate this, but I can. I think this is a really cool feature and worth talking about for a couple of reasons, and I'll highlight that. So Azure has, one of the benefits of using Azure is we provide customers protection against distributed denial of service attacks to their public endpoints that they have exposed on our network. So when you deploy a VM, the VM, as we've seen in previous episodes, it always has a private IP address. If you go to the NIC on that VM, it doesn't have, you don't see evidence that it has a public IP address. We do network address translation from the public endpoint using the rules and ACLs that you defined explicitly, and only allow that traffic to go and hit the network interface on your virtual machine. So because we have that layer of network address translation and rules that we allow you to define as a customer, we can provide some denial of service attack, detection and remediation. And it's interesting, just as a side note, I've had customers ask specifically how we do that, and I think the first rule of security is not to talk about security. And interestingly, and even internally, with it, they being the security team, doesn't disclose some of the details about devices or software or heuristics that we use to detect that, for rather obvious reasons. But we're actually lighting up, or as part of at Ignite, we announced a service that is called Azure Ddos Protection, where we provide protection from layer 3 down to layer 3 and layer 4, and even layer 7 when it's actually being used in conjunction with something we call an app gateway that has there's a version of an application gateway. Application gateway is like it's a layer 7 load balancer for at web applications. So it does SSL offloading, has a number of other features. And one of the features it has is web application firewall, capabilities. So we have a lot of partners in ISVs in the marketplace that provide that sort of thing with Palo Alto, Barracuda, and so forth. And we have our own solution as well. So the DDoS protection service is, when used in conjunction with that, can provide some layer 7 DDoS protection for customers, making lots of web requests to an application, trying to take your site down. The other thing, though, that DDoS, so we have services that protect you by default at the infrastructure level, but this actually allows customers to see, how many times they've been attacked, to be able to put some, you can see that there's some details on here about, logging and alerting and, telemetry that this provided as part of the service, and as well as some policies that you can tune based on the type of application that you're exposing on your virtual network. But one of the things about running a service in Azure, as I mentioned earlier, is you have to pay money for it. Anytime traffic's leaving a data center, there's a cost to that. So if a customer is, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say customer, if a nefarious user is impairing a customer's workload in hammering the heck out of their website, all of that traffic leaving is actually, even if it's going into the ether, into nowhere, or Never Land, it's costing the customer money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So customers using this service, and actually, I think that there's a right here, cost protection. So we actually provide customers credits for using a web application as an example. If a lot of traffic starts coming in and the DDoS service detects that or logs that event, well, the website might actually respond to that particular attack and scale out and actually add more web servers because it thinks it's a legitimate, traffic increase. We will actually provide funding back to customers for that particular event, for the costs that they incurred and kind of the rules that they defined to scale out their infrastructure because they've been attacked. So this is actually, some assurance that we provide to customers using this service that, that we can avoid some costs that they might incur if they're attacked.
Mm. That's cool. So the first rule of security is you never talk about security, but we'll throw a website up about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's not any specific details about how we do it. So.
I know. It's just a joke.
Yeah. You're right. Yep. Okay. So let's go on to some of the next features. Okay. Network security group tagging. All right. So with a virtual network, and let me go into this. So in any virtual network you create in Azure, you can actually create what are called network security groups. And again, we've talked about this before. It kind of goes beyond just simple ACLing, where you can actually define rules on what type of traffic that you permit inbound to your workload and outbound, and actually talking about it at a network level. This is actually referring to traffic coming into a network that might have hundreds of virtual machines or web servers actually running in it. And you can also apply network security groups at a virtual machine level. So there are a couple different layers like policies where you can define these. Right now I'm looking at it at an example of a set of network security groups or a network security group at a network level. So when you define a rule, so let's say that this network security group has 50 web servers in it, and all 50 web servers are standalone, which is not advisable in the cloud world to do, but let's just use that as a simple talking point. They have standalone web servers. They all have different web applications on them.
Yeah.
So previously, what I would have had to do is actually define a individual rules saying traffic coming into port 80 publicly, going to a particular VM on my network, I'd have to actually create a rule for each one of those. So there's a couple of things that we've introduced here. So and also when I talked earlier about network security groups, or I'm sorry, not network security, storage accounts, where we actually defined permissions or restrictions rather to allow particular networks to talk to a storage account. Maybe, again, using my example of being a finance customer, I want to only restrict my my server from communicating with very specific public endpoints. And well, as we talked about earlier, storage has public endpoint on it, and I don't want that VM to go to the internet or any other public service. Well, we actually advertise the ranges of our data centers, and it's massive. We have just gigantic blocks of Class A and B networks, and they change all the time. The ones for East and West, I mean, we renumber things constantly. It's a nightmare for customers to keep up in creating specific rules just for allowing a VM, for instance, to be able to talk to a storage account. So one thing that we actually have now is we actually have something called service tags that you can actually go in here, and I can actually say, I want to allow traffic from a storage account, but specifically storage in central U.S., to be able to talk to applications or workloads deployed in this network. The benefit of this particular level of tagging is I don't have to worry about the block of IPs that are used for storage in central U.S. We'll maintain that for you. So this makes things way easier for customers.
Who defines those tags? Is it us or is it the customer?
It's so the service tags, it's us. So these are all
so,
if you look.
So there's a lot of people that have stuff, in central U.S. How do we map what the customer has? Like, for instance, if I create this rule, there's got to be some mechanism that says, I'm talking to servers in storage.central U.S., but they're only servers that this customer owns.
Right. Yeah. So that's true. That that technically this would permit any storage account in central U.S. Yeah.
So there's got to be some other. I mean, obviously there are user accounts and there are tenant security, et cetera, that come into play here. But
that is true. Right now, this is more of a broad. I mean, I shouldn't say it is narrowing the scope because you're only allowing this VM to talk to storage in that particular region that you have stuff stored in.
Right.
Right now it doesn't actually go as granular of being able to say to this storage account. However, I did show the service endpoint feature, and that actually that could be used to farther refine what particular storage accounts, because that can be done at a network level. I can say I want this storage account to only talk to this virtual network. So that's so we do have a way to kind of click down a little bit in that regard, but that's a good point.
Yeah, no, that was excellent.
Yeah. So service tags, we create, we manage the definition and groups of IPs behind them, but we also have something. Let me reconnect here. So actually, I had a window open to what was called the Cloud Shell, and that's actually one of the announcements I'm going to show as well here in a second. For those of you who have not seen this is actually super cool for you to be able to get to. In this case, I'm getting to a bash shell that I don't have to authenticate to my subscription. So this is a really easy way to be able to run commands against your subscription that are only available through the command line without having to download the latest command line tool and then authenticate to your subscription and going through all those hoops. You can just literally click in a little option there and get to a bash shell. And actually, while I'm talking about that, I can highlight one of the other announcements. One of the other options here is Powershell, which is actually really cool that you can literally connect to a PowerShell shell. And you can actually, you have a home directory that you can actually store scripts that you commonly use. So regardless of where you log into the Azure portal, whether you're at a coffee shop, at your office, you'll be able to have all your scripts with you and be able to execute tasks against your subscription.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I'm going to make this just a little bigger here. So the service tagging is something that we control administratively, but customers might have a desire to actually create their own groupings of services. So using my example of maybe 50 web servers, instead of actually creating individual rules for each one of those, wouldn't it be great if you could just say, the NIC on web server 1, web server 2, web server 3 are all part of a group that we're just going to call collectively the web server group. And any server that is tagged as being part of that application group, we're going to allow traffic going to port 80 to be able to be permitted all the way back through to that machine. So I don't have to create individual rules for all 50 of them.
That's cool.
So that actually is something we have called application security groups. And unfortunately, like we talked about earlier, this is not in the portal at all yet. You have to do this through PowerShell or through the command line. Yeah. So I'm going to use this bash shell. And I've created one earlier, and you can see I actually created one called web servers. So it might look a little bit confusing. When you using the command line, it spits out a lot of JSON showing all of the properties for that particular aspect. So these are just parameters that I could actually provide when I created that particular security group, and I can actually I can also change them after the fact. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a network interface of a web server that I have deployed into this particular resource group, and in here there should be application security groups. So this is actually what's not in the portal yet. If I look at this network card on the portal, it looks no different than one without an application security group. So I have to imagine that at some point there's going to be some way to be able to see what application security groups are applied to a network interface. And the cool thing is you can have multiple security groups applied to a NIC. So right now I just have one. Maybe I want to make this, maybe the web server is also a database server, and I want to create a group for each. I can actually assign tags to, or service tags to both, or application tags to both of them. So in this case, it's showing that this is actually my network interface, and it's showing that it's actually part of this web server's particular application group. If you were to look at this security group in the portal, this is actually what you would see. So I actually see a web. I actually called my rule web rule. You can see the destination is blank. So in the portal today, you don't actually see evidence that the destination is actually the my application tag, my application service tag. So basically, this is allowing traffic from port 80 from the internet, or to port 80 from the internet to any network interface that's tagged as being part of my web service group. That's really what this rule is defining. So I can just bring on new virtual machines and tag their NICs as being part of that web server group, and it would allow traffic in. Make sense? Kind of
yeah.
I know it's kind of harder to show. You have to use your imagination a bit because we had to use a command line. But it also gave us an excuse to show the command line.
Well, we're all Star Wars and Disney fans here, so using our imagination is not a...
That's right. So moving along to one of the another feature that we unveiled. So we've had something, and actually we even talked about this in one of the other series of shows around networking, called VNet Peering. And what that allows you to do is, let's say you had two networks in the West US, and you wanted to string those together. Previously, the way that you would do that is using a VPN tunnel within Azure, a site-to-site tunnel. The problem with that is that the bandwidth that the maximum throughput that we allow through a VPN gateway is 1.25 gigabits. So, obviously, if they're sitting in the same region and possibly even in containers right next to each other in the data center, we have much higher bandwidth capacity than 1.25 gigabits. So so that's where VNet peering comes into play. As long as the network numbers don't overlap, you can literally think of this as taking a patch cord from one switch and plugging it into another, and we provide routing between them. So we've had this for a while, but it's been limited to a geography. So if I had a network in the East U.S. and one in the West U.S., the only way I can connect those prior to this being available is by using IPsec tunnel within Azure. So now, this particular network is in West 2. If I go to peerings, there's only a couple regions that this is available right now. So it's going to roll out more globally, and this is in West to West Central. I think Canada actually was a region. So there's only a few regions that you can do this in right now. And when I go to add, so this particular network is in West 2, as I saw, and in fact, actually, you can see I named it West 2 just to keep us, to keep things consistent, so we know what region that I'm actually trying to peer this particular network to. And the other region that we have this available in is West Central U.S. So I happen to have a network that's actually sitting in West Central U.S. for the show. So I can actually string together these two networks across geographies and actually allow traffic to flow over our private network. The benefit to the customer being, you don't have any public IPsec endpoints that you're exposing. It's just riding the rails of the millions of miles, literally millions of miles of dark fiber that we have going between all of our regional data centers around the globe. So, and the other benefit is we don't guarantee any sort of throughput, but in some tests that I've seen, and if you look around at some of the videos at Ignite, there was one of the program managers was actually copying data from one region to another, and they were getting on an order of 6 to 8 gigabits per second of traffic between across regions. So
yeah, that's pretty. Yeah. That's more than I would expect.
Yeah. So I'm assuming there's some throttling. There's probably lots of variables, and we have no guarantee over that bandwidth. But the point being, is way more than 1.25 gigabits.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
All right. So Azure Monitor. Let's. So one of the other changes, everybody wants to know what's going on in their subscription, and as we add more and more services to Azure, they have, they spew out more and more data. And how do you look at that data universally? How do you get alerts about what's happening? So we made some enhancements to Azure Monitor, and just looking at some tie-ins we had for service health, you can actually see at a glance, right, when you go into this Azure Monitor, if I click on service issues. So service issues would be issues that are happening in Azure that are specific either broadly, or that kind of affecting large pools of customers in a region, or maybe it's a more isolated issue affecting just a smaller pool of customers in a region, and we want to communicate that to a customer. So this is a way a customer can actually see in more detail than what they would see in the Azure, what we call the Service Health Dashboard. This is actually more specific to the customer subscription, and I'm very happy to see that they're zero at the moment for at least for the regions that I'm using with my subscriptions. But had there been something going on, I could actually see that at a glance. So just some improvements there. And if I actually go to it, just to kind of show you some other things, because I actually spoke to a customer yesterday who didn't actually even know that this existed. If I go to health history, this actually shows issues that have impaired particular regions or my subscription going back in time. So I can actually provide some filtering here on region or subscriptions and time ranges and so forth. And we had an unfortunate event occur in North Central U.S. Not always good to talk about things that happen this bad, but it's a reality we live in when you're kind of going at have infrastructure the size that we or some of our other competitors have. And we had an issue that impacted a lot of customers in North Central U.S. We quickly restored service, but then the important thing to take away from this is that a customer can actually download a PDF file with a very detailed timeline of events, details about what we did to make sure that doesn't happen in the future, and that sort of thing. So customers can actually obtain this directly from that health history. And if we had any planned maintenance events scheduled, again, specific to services a customer has deployed, it's always a challenge. If we post make a blog post saying we're going to update all of the VMs and all the hosts in North Central U.S., how do I know when I'm impacted? Do I even know if that's going to impact me? This is a way that customers can see in more granular detail about, because at this level we know what you have running and what clusters are on, and we can provide more detail to you on what you need to do.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right. So the final thing to show is a new service that is called Azure File Sync. So this is actually another preview service that we launched called Azure Storage Sync Service. So we've had something for a while that is called Azure Files. So it's a component of a Azure storage account where you can actually create an SMB share in the cloud, and we're making just actually an FYI on that is we're going to be expanding that feature because this particular storage sync service sits on top of Azure Files in a storage account. So Azure Files is a way to create a serverless share. So if you wanted to have a share with utilities that you use across all your VMs, or a share where log files get deposited by a bunch of virtual machines, or you wanted to be able to mount maybe a directory on an Azure website, a PaaS service, where you wanted to actually access config files or images or something like that. Azure Files is a way that you can actually do that without having to stand up a server or a storage controller, or NFS share or something along those lines in Azure. Sync services takes that a little bit farther in that we allow customers to do some interesting things with file share. So what you can actually do with this is, if I go to registered servers, I download a utility on any Windows server. It doesn't matter where that server is actually running. And I actually define an amount of storage that I want to allocate to this service on that machine. So let's say that I have two offices, one in or two locations for my organization, one in Asia and then one in the U.S. And I have users in both of those offices, and file and print servers that are there, providing local facilities to the users running there. And I want to allow servers that are also in Azure to be able to access some of that data, and more specifically to allow the file share in the US to actually sync to the file share in Asia. So what this actually allows you to do is I could actually deploy a server in both of those locations, in Azure or on-prem, and actually say I want to dedicate 5 terabytes of local disk space to file sync. But maybe I have 200 terabytes of data. So I can put that in Azure Storage and point each of my servers to that. And what happens is it only pulls down the data that the US users are using and the Asia users are using, but the golden copy of that data is in Azure Storage. And you can also take it a step farther, and I can actually create a storage account maybe in the East US where my office is, and in Japan, as an example, in Asia, and actually allow that data to replicate using the service across, again, our private network. So the idea is that the file server that's in Japan doesn't have to go all the way across the pond to the golden copy of my data that's in a storage account in the East. I basically would have 2 storage accounts that we replicate, and then you could point file servers to that pool of data. So it's a way to be able to bring data closer to the users. And the other cool thing about it, and it's a little bit more complicated to set up, that's why I don't actually have a demo of it. But when using the example of the 200 terabytes of data, and I only have 5 terabytes stored locally, if I go to that share, if I'm a user and I go to that share, I actually see metadata for all the data that's in that storage account, even though it might not physically be on that server. So as soon as I actually try to open one of those files, if it's not already on that machine will actually go out and retrieve it and pull it down locally. So there's just a delay in getting that data. There's a lot of services that are not really, I shouldn't say a lot, but there's a number of players, ourselves included. We have a appliance called StoreSimple. We have other partners who have similar storage devices, Nasuni and NetApp. There's many solutions to solve this problem. This is a native to Azure solution that really only thing it requires is a agent on a Windows machine that is running anywhere. So so it's a way to kind of better propagate data around the globe.
That's cool.
Yeah. So so with that was really the key things I wanted to showcase today.
Yeah, well, that was a lot of stuff, man. I appreciate you doing that for us.
Yeah, no problem.
But I've got one more thing to show you.
Okay.
This is my cloud-based Azure Amiga.
That is awesome. Yeah. With the 3.5-inch floppy on that thing, no less. Nice.
Yeah. So you plug it in and you hear. But it's friggin' awesome.
So we actually have, just as keeping it real on the Azure topic, we have you can actually take something like that and plug it in a network in an Equinix facility and connect up the network in Equinix to Azure directly. So customers can still run old crap like that. And
oh, really?
I shouldn't say the word crap. I should.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, did you just call my Amiga crap? I love the Amiga.
That was for its day. That was a pretty spectacular machine.
Yeah. So I had before I came to Microsoft, and I've been at Microsoft almost 30 years, right? 27 years. So
congratulations.
A long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I owned a Commodore repair shop.
Okay.
And I would fix Commodore 64s and VIC-20s and Amigas, and they had the PC-10.
Board level fix?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Holy cow. That's awesome.
Still got my soldering station back there. I also wind guitar pickups periodically. But yeah, man, I used to do component level repair on 64s and VIC-20s and PCs and all sorts of stuff.
That's awesome.
And I still love doing that. I just built a Marshall amp, which is, if you're a guitar player, you know what a Marshall amp is. But
I saw that on Facebook. That looked pretty cool.
Yeah, I just hand built a Marshall head, a clone of a Marshall head, and I build guitar effects and stuff like that all the time too. It's just fun to do.
Yeah. Keep the old noggin thinking analytically.
Well, and I like my wife yelling at me to get my crap off the kitchen table. So that's the other reason. I love my wife. She's phenomenal.
Yeah, very, very supportive of your hobbies.
Now the secret is out. I've told everybody. But yeah, just fun to do stuff like that. And I just found a couple days ago, so I ordered it. I just found an Amiga to HDMI adapter. So
you're kidding?
No. So now
is it a VGA to HDMI or is it something
the
special?
Amiga has two video ports, right? It's got an RGB 23, which is, huge.
Yeah.
It's almost parallel port size, right?
Okay.
It's a DB23 connector, and then they have just a regular RGB DB15, which is the standard, VGA port.
Right.
So this one has both. The original Amiga only had the big one.
Okay. I know Sun actually used something they call a 13W3. It was like 13 pins, and then it had like 3 coaxial connectors on the DB connector.
Yeah, probably RGB.
Yeah.
And the 13 pins probably controlled signaling and stuff like that.
So,
yeah. I mean, it's all kind of neat. I love old stuff like that.
Yeah. But I know a lot of broadcasters actually use the Amiga with a video toaster to do lower thirds, and
that was huge. Yeah, that was huge. I still every once in a while see, like, if you're in a small town and they have like a little public access cable channel, every once in a while you'll see like the guide scroll by and you'll be able to tell that it's it's a video toaster. So they're still out there. They're very they're few and far between now, but they're still out there.
There's an article about a local school in not to my community, but farther west and north of where I live in Michigan, that the school district, the entire school district, they had modems that actually went to different buildings. I don't remember how many buildings, 12, 13 buildings. And the HVAC system and all the boilers was controlled by software on a Commodore 64. And it worked. They said that it was written by a student, back when Commodores were
Yeah.
readily available. And that student never left the area and still does bug fixes and enhancements to that to this day. And they said that to replace it with commercial stuff was, I mean, it was 7-figure price tag. And the school district said, you know, we're budget strapped. We don't think it makes sense to do that right now when this thing works fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and the cool thing is that if you go up to eBay, you can buy Commodore 64s that run for, you know, under $100. And there is actually a company that just announced that they're releasing a you know, a small, you know, it's 50% scale, so it's half the size of a Commodore 64, but it's literally a Commodore 64
full-on VIC-20? Nice.
Yeah, well,
I got to send me that link. My son would love that.
And it's got an HDMI monitor out, and it's
okay.
Unique.
Got a couple of improvements on it. Okay,
yeah.
That's cool.
By the way, I just bought a. So I've got to tell you the story, and I know we're going over a little bit, but you guys that are geeks, you'll enjoy this. So I was just in Huntsville, Alabama at Marshall Space Flight Center, and there's a big ham radio computer store there called Gigaparts.
Okay.
And walked into Gigaparts, and they have this thing called, I think it's like the Necton or Retro 5 or something like that. Anyway, it's about this big, you know, about 12 inches long and about 6 inches tall. And it's got cartridge slots for Super Nintendo, like Genesis, every video game cartridge that you could think of. The only thing it didn't have was the Atari 2600. But you could literally buy the vintage cartridges, plug them into the right slot, and play your video.
That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
I know there's lots of software-based emulators, but you know, those are kind of in the gray area of legality. But that's perfectly legal. That's pretty cool.
Because you're using the original cartridges, which
exactly.
All the console itself was really just an adapter for the cartridges. But
right. That's really cool.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of neat that stuff still exists and that it's out. We should do. Chris, I know you're listening. Chris is our producer, by the way. We should do a retro, you know, totally nothing, doesn't have anything to do with Microsoft stuff, but it would be cool to do like a retro gaming episode just to do it.
I built a little retro Pi console. This is a desktop one.
So I just bought my first Raspberry Pi the other day. I'm waiting for it to come because I read about Retro Pi.
Nice. If you got any questions about it, let me know. I wired up the joystick. I got buttons on it, full-on arcade style.
So apparently there's also an Amiga emulator and a C64 emulator in Retro.
There is, yeah.
Yeah, so that's really cool. I should have that today, by the way.
Nice. Oh, yeah, you got a weekend project.
There you go. So before we bore everybody else out of their friggin' minds, because you and I could geek out on this stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, remember the Thrustmaster joysticks that looked like Roll Fighter?
Logitech had some even that were like that. Heck, Microsoft had some too back in the day. The Sidewinder.
We did. Yeah, we had the Sidewinder. I've still got a Sidewinder somewhere.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember that one that we had that had the ball kind of in the middle and had two controller. It was like one big controller, but it pivoted and.
Yeah.
I've still got one of those in a drawer somewhere too.
And you just have a museum.
That's what we should do. We should do like a retro Microsoft computer hardware show.
That would be cool. Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, listen. Before we wrap up, I want to thank you for doing the show again. As always, you're an awesome guest. You know, we love having you on the show.
No problem. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, guys, without further ado, that's your taste of Premiere.